this evening, whether you are joining us live or tuning in virtually later. My name is Caitlin Dietrich, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Special Projects at the museum. We begin by acknowledging that we are filming on traditional land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to be here, and we thank all the generations of generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, there have been Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we acknowledge the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. To learn more about the traditional land you may be viewing this program from, please visit native-land.ca to learn more about where you live in your region. I wanted to end by acknowledging that May 5th in Canada is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit people. If you are not familiar with this crisis, I would recommend you research Red Dress Day to learn more. There are many resources out there about this crisis one can easily find to continue to educate ourselves, raise awareness, elevate Indigenous voices, and ultimately act change on the statistics. Thank you. Tonight's dialogue is in support of the museum's latest exhibition, Dinosaurs, the Age of Big Weird Feathered Things, which will be open to the public when we can safely open. If you are interested in seeing a sneak peek of the exhibition, feel free to check it out virtually on our YouTube channel, the Museum TV. We have a great virtual tour of that exhibit. Now to introduce tonight's speaker. David C. Evans holds the Temerty Chair in Vertebrate Paleontology and oversees dinosaur research at the Royal Ontario Museum. He's an associate professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Toronto. David is an Ontario-born researcher who is recognized globally as an authority on the rich dinosaur fossil record of Canada and on the mass extinction event that marked the end of the age of dinosaurs. In the last decade, he has published over 100 scientific articles and helped discover and name over 12 new species of dinosaur, including the remarkable horned dinosaur Wendyceratops from southern Alberta, and the wickedly armored Zool named after the Ghostbusters movie monster. As a curator, David helped develop the ROM's dinosaur galleries and was lead curator of the major traveling exhibitions Ultimate Dinosaur and Zool, Life of an Armored Dinosaur. He has been featured in numerous television shows, documentaries, and David was co-creator of the history series Dino Hunt Canada. So I will be monitoring the chat throughout the event. If you have any questions for David, we will take them at the end. But now please join me in welcoming David C. Evans.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, and to the museum for having me here today. As Caitlin mentioned, my area of specialty is the dinosaur fossil record of Canada. And as many of you know from visiting places like the ROM or the Royal Trail Museum in Alberta, Canada is home to rich fossil beds that have been, quite productive historically. But what you might not be aware of is just how Canada is contributing to paleontology today. And those, famous badlands are still producing some amazing new dinosaurs. And we have more paleontologists here in Canada studying those dinosaurs than ever before. So the rate of discovery is truly staggering. And we're entering what I call a new golden age of dinosaur discovery here in Canada. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the history of dinosaur collecting here in Canada, in particular Alberta, and then talk to you about how my team has contributed to finding some of these exciting new dinosaurs right here in our backyard, and then give you sort of perspectives on where we're going next. And the hint I'm going to drop here is it's a very exciting time to be a paleontologist. So let's look at the dinosaur fossil record of Canada. The blue dots on the map here show where dinosaurs have been found in our country. And it's really special in terms of what we have to show for dinosaurs in Canada. We have early Jurassic prosauropod dinosaurs in Nova Scotia. We have duck-billed and horned dinosaurs. from the Arctic Circle and the Arctic Islands. We even have ostrich dinosaurs and duck-billed dinosaurs from Vancouver Island. But the richest area for dinosaur fossil discoveries has been Alberta and Saskatchewan. So as many of you probably know, Alberta's badlands are quite famous for dinosaur fossil discoveries. And they have a rich history of dinosaur fossil discoveries that has been recognized globally. Here's my dog coming to say hi to everyone, Doug. All right, he's just going to say hi here. All right, Dougie, get down. Yeah, the discoveries from Alberta go back well over a century. And the area known as Dinosaur Provincial Park in particular has produced a great wealth of exceptionally preserved specimens. The first discoveries, though, that have hinted at this rich fossil legacy came in 1884 by J.B. Tyrrell, who was exploring the badlands around the town of Drumheller and the site of the Royal Trail Museum, which bears his name today. He was looking in these badlands primarily for coal deposits when he stumbled across the skull of a large carnivorous dinosaur, a relative of Tyrannosaurus rex, that was subsequently named Albertaosaurus by Henry Fairfield Osborn in the same publication that gave Tyrannosaurus rex its name. But it took quite a few decades for the true potential to be realized. His discoveries focused on the town around Drumheller, rocks that are about 70 million years old. The richest fossil beds in Alberta are undoubtedly those of Dinosaur Provincial Park north of Brooks, a little further down the Red Deer River. The wealth of fossils here was first recognized by Weston in the late 1880s, and they were first explored by Canada's very first vertebrate paleontologist, Lawrence Lamb, around the turn of the last century. So around the first expeditions that were dedicated specifically to collecting vertebrate fossils in Canada were led by Lamb in the late 1800s, around 1898 to the early 1900s. But it wasn't for yet another almost decade later that the staggering, almost complete skeletons of dinosaurs started coming out of the ground, and the world started to really take notice of the spectacular resources that we have here in Canada. This came with exploration by Barnum Brown of the American Museum of Natural History, which started in earnest in 1909 and went to about 1915 with a number of large-scale expeditions run by the American Museum of Natural History, starting in 1909 in the Drumheller area, and then moving to those extremely rich fossil beds of Dinosaur Provincial Park north of Brooks a couple of years later. And it was here that really the spectacular nature of the fossils came to be with the discoveries of Brown. This is an example here of just the type of material that's produced in Dinosaur Provincial Park. This is a skeleton of Corythosaurus, one of the first finds. It's a duck-billed dinosaur. And these were some of the first dinosaurs found in North America, or really anywhere in the world, that were totally complete from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. And the preservation is such that we get more than just the hard parts on a lot of these specimens. Many of these articulated dinosaurs, articulated basically means where you have the shin bone connected to the knee bone, connected to the thigh bone, basically the bones of the skeleton preserved as they were in life. We also get soft tissue preserved. And here you can see the skin impressions preserved on this particular skeleton across its belly and much of its tail and limbs. A number of these quote unquote dinosaur mummies were recovered during this time period. And what Brown found was a huge amount of these more or less complete skulls and skeletons. And he was able to collect them in a way that Lamb and Weston and others who had worked these areas hadn't been able to, with techniques that were developed by the Sternbergs, basically making plaster of Paris and burlap casts. We call these field jackets around the bones, collecting them in big blocks. And by doing this, you're able to collect entire skeletons relatively intact. And of course, these were cherished by the American Museum and subsequent museums as exhibitions in these newly constructed dinosaur halls, which were driving attendance to natural history museums at the time. The other innovation that Brown brought to Alberta that really helped with his efficiency is a unique way of collecting these skeletons by boat. And so this is a scow or a barge that Brown had custom built for his team in Red Deer. They were put into the Red Deer River upstream of the dinosaur localities. And this was basically a floating field camp with a mess hall in the tent that you see there. And they would float down the Red Deer River. The badlands are exposed along the sides of the river, would stop where things look promising. The team would hop out, prospect, collect dinosaur fossils, bring them back to the scow, drop them off where they cross the next road or major town, and then they would continue on their way. And using this method, they were able to collect tens of tons of dinosaur fossils and ship them back to New York. And as I said, some of these were the most complete dinosaur skeletons ever found, and virtually all of them were species that were brand new to science. After a couple of years of Barnum Brown, the American Museum, exploiting these Canadian fossil beds, the Canadian government took notice. The Geologic Survey, they were actually pretty foresighted in the way they dealt with this. Rather than legislating Barnum Brown out of Alberta, they decided to hire a team to compete with Barnum Brown and collect some of these riches for Canada. The GSC hired Charles Azalea Sternberg, who is a fossil hunter out of Kansas, who worked for Edward Drinker Cope, among others, was at the time one of the most seasoned and well-known fossil collectors anywhere in the world. And he bestowed upon his three sons, George, Levi, and Charles M., who worked with him, these skills in collecting large fossil vertebrates, including dinosaurs. And the GSC hiring Sternberg and his sons to compete with Brown in about 1912, they were in the same areas at the same time for several years in both Drumheller and in the Steville or Dinosaur Provincial Park area. And it didn't, the presence of another team didn't slow down the discoveries one bit. The Geologic Survey during this period before World War I collected a huge number of very beautiful skeletons and sent them back to Ottawa, where they were prepared and began to go on display in the Victoria Museum. Here you can see C.H. Sternberg collecting the skull of a Chasmosaurus, beautifully complete skull of Chasmosaurus in the field in Dinosaur Park. Barnum Brown and the activity of the American Museum, as well as the Geologic Survey, came to a short stop in the World War I years, and this is when the Royal Ontario Museum got into the game, and this was basically the brainchild of founding director William Parks. The Royal Ontario Museum had just been founded and opened to the public in 1914, a few years earlier. Parks was a major proponent of the founding of a large natural history museum in Toronto. He was a professor at the University of Toronto and an invertebrate paleontologist by trade. But he noticed all of these wonderful vertebrate fossils, in particular dinosaurs, going to New York and to Ottawa. And he noticed they were a huge fan favorite with the public at these museums. And he wanted to bring those crowds to the newly founded Royal Ontario Museum. So he struck out on his first expedition to the Badlands of Alberta, namely the area around Dinosaur Provincial Park, and collected the ROM's first complete dinosaur skeleton in 1908 or 1918. He needed some expertise to prepare it, and he hired one of Charles Hazelius' sons, Levi Sternberg, over the winter of 1918-1919 to prepare this skeleton. This is the skeleton of Gripposaurus incurvamanus, which is still on display in the ROM galleries today. And with that hire, the ROM had one of the world's eminent fossil collectors that stayed on staff at the ROM for almost 40 years and ran a large series of dinosaur expeditions for the museum during that time when the ROM made its famous collection of dinosaurs and other fossil vertebrates under the leadership of Levi Sternberg, and built one of the world's great collections that we have here in Toronto. So this period of activity, of course, resulted in a huge number of scientific papers describing the wealth of vertebrate fossils that were coming out of Canada. And this graph gives you an idea of just how fast and furious the discoveries were coming. On the y-axis of this graph is the cumulative number of dinosaur species that had been named from the rocks of Alberta. So starting with the publication of Canada's first named dinosaurs in 1902 with Lawrence Lamb, you can see shortly thereafter the big steep increase, which was a result of Brown's work, and then followed by C.H. and C.M. Sternberg's work. And then after 1920, a lot of publications by both C.M. Sternberg and Parkes. You can see this just almost exponential increase in the amount of dinosaurs named. And that parallels the scientific interest and work being done on dinosaurs globally at the time. This period is known as the Canadian Dinosaur Rush, that time period from about 1909 to the beginning or so of the Second World War. And as you can see, in that short couple of decades, almost 50 dinosaur species were discovered and named during that time. So it's a really incredible piece of paleontological history was actually forged here. This was a good percentage of the world's dinosaurs at the time, and still is. Now, not only were the specimens collected for Ottawa, for the ROM, and for New York, other institutions took note of this, including the Field Museum in Chicago, the University of Alberta in Alberta. And because of the huge number of specimens that were collected, these specimens were traded all around the world. And so Alberta's dinosaurs and Canada's dinosaurs are literally all over the world. Of course, the best collections are with those institutions that worked there the longest, like the ROM and like the Canadian Museum of Nature and the American Museum. But you can go to La Plata in Argentina, Rio de Janeiro, the Natural History Museum in London, the Smithsonian, the Field Museum in Chicago. A lot of their best skeletons that are pride of place in the galleries were actually collected here in Canada during this dinosaur rush period. Now, as I said, that curve of basically the discovery curve of named dinosaurs, it reflects the overall work that was being done on dinosaurs and the interest in dinosaur science at the time. This leveled off quite a bit after World War II. And there was a number of decades where not a lot of new dinosaurs were named from Canada. There was not a lot of work going on in Canadian dinosaur science or dinosaur science globally. Many of the big museums around the world that had the means had filled their galleries with big dinosaur specimens to draw in the crowds. And there was a general sort of feeling that all we really needed to know about dinosaurs, we knew. After all, they were sort of big, dumb, lizards that were mired sort of up to their armpits in swamps, and they went extinct and they gave way to the age of mammals. At this particular time, the most important questions in paleontology really focused to the evolution of mammals. And most of the work that was being done in paleontology was centered around those questions. And so the dinosaurs, dinosaur research and new discoveries sort of stagnated for quite a while. And this sort of few decades passed until the discovery of a particular raptor dinosaur called Deinonychus by John Ostrom of Yale University in 1969. And this rekindled an old idea by Huxley that that birds were the descendants of dinosaurs, and that dinosaurs were more active, more agile, and more ecologically sophisticated animals than had previously been thought. And this discovery really ushered in a total rethinking of dinosaurs, both from the scientific perspective as well as the popular perspective. And this time was called the Dinosaur Renaissance. And this took place through the 70s and early 80s. And we had one of the architects of the Dinosaur Renaissance that really used the Canadian dinosaur fossil record to highlight some of the incredible behaviors and sophistication of these animals. And that was Dr. Philip Currie. He grew up in Southern Ontario, came to the ROM as a kid and got inspired to study dinosaurs as a career path. And he noticed that on the labels of all the dinosaurs at the ROM, they all said that they were from Alberta. Yet there was no real museum in Alberta that basically that presented Alberta dinosaurs within the province that had these amazing riches. And he made it his life's goal to get back to Alberta, collect more from these incredible localities, and to put Alberta on the map in terms of paleontology, where it should be, rather than in the sort of dusty corridors of the Eastern museums, where it really been languishing for the last 20 or 30 years. And so as a result of Phil's work in the late 70s and his lobbying to build a museum, he was successful. This resulted in the construction of the Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller, Alberta. This is, a place where many Canadian kids, for instance, go drag their parents to explore the Badlands and dream of finding dinosaurs themselves. I certainly bugged my parents to go here, and when I was a kid, and I got to go here when I was 8. And it was amazing to see a museum like this completely dedicated to paleontology. They had a very active curatorial group that was led by Phil and Dave Eberth and Don Brinkman. And they started to not only did their research, was their research important in rekindling interest in the Badlands of Alberta and what it meant for understanding dinosaur ecosystems, but they also started to have students of their own. And I was lucky enough in my early career to be basically adopted by the Tyrrell Museum, and I got to work on duckbills for my undergraduate and graduate thesis from Alberta. And basically the work around the Tyrrell Museum, coupled with this renewed interest in dinosaurs globally, resulted in a large number of new scientific discoveries in Alberta. And to put it in perspective, the museum was built in 1984. And since the time that the museum opened its doors and research has started being done there, a huge amount of scientific data has been produced, and a large number of new dinosaur discoveries have been made. So if you take a look at the dinosaur rush, the slope of that curve, compare it to the rate of which new dinosaur discoveries are being made today. in the last 10 to 15 years, the rate of new dinosaur discoveries in Alberta it basically parallels the rate that we have seen in the Canadian dinosaur rush, which was for a long time thought to have been the golden age in Canadian dinosaur studies. And basically the Trail Museum and the work that has come out of it has ushered in this new golden age of dinosaur discoveries. And I'm like quite lucky to have played a small part in discovering some of these new dinosaurs. And as I said, this is just the new dinosaurs that have been named. There's over 70 species of dinosaurs that have been named from Alberta to date. But this is a proxy for a whole suite of other research that's going on these amazing animals, research into their ecology, their growth, their extinction, and so on. So I would argue right now it's about as exciting a time as it's ever been to be a paleontologist here in Canada. And I've played a role in discovering some of these new dinosaurs. So I'm going to share with you some stories from the field here and introduce you to some of the new dinosaurs that we've discovered. Here's a bit of a rogues gallery of some of our discoveries over the past 10 years or so. My team has been involved in the discovery of about 10 new dinosaurs here in Canada. Here's Mercuryceratops gemini from the Dinosaur Park Formation, Xenoceratops formosensis, one of the oldest horned dinosaur relative of Triceratops known. Albertaosaurus, a dinosaur that I actually found the individual bones of the specimen. Here's Gryphoceratops, Akrotholis, and the particular dinosaur I'm going to talk a bit more about in detail is this last one here, this horned dinosaur, which would become known as Wendyceratops. All of these dinosaurs were found as part of the Southern Alberta Dinosaur Project. This is a project that I co-lead with my colleague and mentor, Dr. Michael Ryan. He's one of the world's experts in horned dinosaurs. He took me on my first dinosaur dig when I was 19 years old, took me under his wing, and him and I have been collaborators ever since. And this is a project that Michael and I developed to explore some of the lesser known dinosaur bearing rocks in Alberta, rocks that are older than the well-explored Horseshoe Canyon and Dinosaur Park formations, that the bulk of the nice specimens that you see in museums have been collected from. But the rocks, even though the rocks of the Old Man Formation, Foremost Formation, and Milk River Formation are not quite as fossiliferous as these well-known units, they're very interesting because they're poorly sampled and they correlate to basically a global gap in our fossil record during this particular time, the Santonian and the early Campanian. And this is when those sort of classic Tyrannosaur dominated and horned and duckbill dinosaur dominated systems, this gap is when those ecosystems basically originated. And so our research here, we hope to shed light on how these particular well-known groups of dinosaurs came to dominate the landscape in North America and Asia. So this has been a continuous field project since 2004, centered along the Milk River region of southern Alberta, which is badlands that basically are right beside the Montana border. We've only missed one field season, and that was last year due to COVID restrictions, unfortunately. We're hoping that we'll be able to get back in earnest this year and continue some of our projects, but that all depends on how well the vaccines roll out and travel policies. So our fingers are crossed we'll continue our project. But it's a really beautiful area where these rocks are exposed. This is a snapshot of the Milk River Natural Area south of Manyberries, Alberta, where we've done a lot of our work. The Badlands here, part of the reason why so little work has been done is that it's about as remote as you get in southern Alberta. To get to these rocks, you're driving 1 or 2 hours away from the nearest gas station and basically where you can pick up any food or anything. And some of these areas where you actually have to go across the Milk River to areas adjacent to the border are are really rugged and remote and difficult to access. And so that's one of the reasons there's been less focus on these particular rocks. And in part, it's hard to blame some of the scientists over the last century or so for not coming here when you've got this bounty in Dinosaur Provincial Park and around Drumheller producing, complete amazing skeletons, often with skin preservation, soft tissue preservation, all easy to access. You can really collect a lot of material. It's harder work down here, which is the reason why people haven't explored this area as much. Now, that said, there were signs that if we did get boots on the ground and we did explore these areas and put the work in, that we would indeed recover some very important specimens. And there were people that came before us who collected some tantalizing bits. These were Loris Russell, who worked for the Royal Ontario Museum as well as the Geologic Survey of Canada. Charlie Sternberg didn't spend a lot of time in the area, but his one expedition in 1937 collected about a dozen really significant skulls and skeletons of some very interesting dinosaurs from this region. And Juan Langston Jr. Followed in Charlie and Loris's footsteps and also collected a number of important specimens and found a number of interesting bone beds as well, including some of the first baby and embryonic dinosaurs that were known at the time, at least from Alberta. So there was enough interesting material that had come from here that we figured that if we really did put the boots on the ground and the time in, that we might be able to sort of start to shed light on this gap in the fossil record. And we predicted, based on some of our previous work in Dinosaur Provincial Park, based on rates of sort of species turnover and the length at which length of time dinosaur species are around, that if we did work these beds and did find what we call, sort of characteristic or diagnostic material, that what we would find might be new species, and we did find just that. So these are some shots of some of our work. We camped out in a farmer's field with basically, no running water, very limited access to electricity, but it was absolutely beautiful. No cell phones, no internet access, very few people around. It's definitely a very peaceful and serene place to be. We brought a large number of students and volunteers out over the years, hundreds of graduate students and undergraduate students from the University of Toronto and Carleton University in particular, who've cut their teeth on paleontological survey and excavation techniques out here with us in the Southern Alberta Dinosaur Project. And we've collected some pretty great specimens. Even though we've had some luck finding a few good specimens over the past 2 or so decades, one of our volunteers, Wendy Sloboda, has certainly had more luck than all of us combined. Wendy, she started finding dinosaurs in Southern Alberta when she was just basically a teenager. She made her first significant dinosaur discoveries when she was 16. She's a Southern Alberta local out of the town of Warner, Alberta, which is about an hour and a half to the west of our field camps. And since that time, she's developed an amazing eye for fossils and a sixth sense for finding significant stuff, where basically, the people before her, including us who've walked the same hillsides, haven't been able to find decent specimens. And so Wendy will come out with us in the summer, and she'll spend some of her time prospecting, on her home turf. And she has found, the lion's share of significant specimens and sites that we've, been fortunate enough to excavate over the last 10 years. She's worked at the Trail Museum as a technician for about a decade before moving back to Southern Alberta and working with us. And something like over 3,000 specimens in the Trail Museum collection have her name on them as the discoverer. So she really is incredible. And so today I'm going to talk to you about one of her most significant finds ever that we got to excavate and actually name in her honor ultimately. So one day at the end of the field season in 2010, Wendy was prospecting on the south side of the Milk River in an area where we hadn't spent a lot of time. But we knew that the rocks there were quite old. They're from the lower Old Man Formation and the Foremost Formation. And these were some of the oldest dinosaur-bearing rocks in the area. And so when she came to us one day with some skull bones of a horned dinosaur, part of the lower part of the neck shields, in particular the squamosal bone with some characteristic ornamentation on it, we got pretty excited because she said that there was more where this came from, that it looks like she had found a bone bed. And when Michael and I looked at some of these pieces that Wendy had found, they were unusual, and we didn't recognize the species, and we thought that she might have found something pretty significant. So we went back to the site in 2011, and we started excavating in earnest. And we were excited, not only because we suspected we might have had a new dinosaur, but we're able to confirm the field locality was indeed in the lowest part of the Old Man Formation. The rocks that we were digging in, where Wendy had made the discovery, was about 79 to 80 million years old. And so these were some very good early fossil of the horned dinosaur family Ceratopsidae that includes the famous Triceratops. These are among the oldest potentially diagnostic specimens in Alberta and anywhere in the world. So the first field season, we started digging along the edge of the quarry, uncovering more bones, very high quality stuff. And this is a shot from that first field season. You can see that white blob there is a plaster jacket that houses one of these bones that we were collecting. You can see right beside it is another rib bone. So the bones seem to be in a reasonable density, 3 to 4 bones per square meter. The more we dug, the more we found. And we got those bones back to the lab the first year, and we had collected some really nice skull bones. And at the time, we had called this animal the South Side Ceratopsid because we're on the south side of the Milk River. And we had basically almost a complete side of the neck shield. And, because of the ornamentation with this series of pro-curving hooks, almost like a wave, we knew that we had a brand new species of dinosaur, and we wanted to find more of it. So we were pretty excited. We had one of the oldest known members of the Ceratopsid family on our hands. So we needed to open up a bigger quarry so we could learn more about this exciting animal. And so here's one of my grad students, Derek Larson, who's now a collections manager at the Royal BC Museum, when we were just opening the quarry. And as you could see, Wendy did not make things easy for us. The bones are cropping out at the base of a very steep hill that's over 100 feet in height. And we had a lot of digging to do to open up the quarry and find more of our dinosaur. So we spent the entire next field season with 4 to 6 people doing nothing but removing what we call overburden. This is the unfossiliferous rock over top of the bone-bearing horizon. And this was obviously a tremendous amount of backbreaking labor, which we couldn't have done without the help of our students, technicians, and volunteers. And this particular field season in 2012, we didn't actually excavate a single bone. And so there was a gamble here. We spent a huge amount of resources basically taking the side off of a hill to chase this bone bed. And what we were hoping, of course, that we would find is some more bones that would help us further characterize and understand what seemed to be a new species of dinosaur. But there were no guarantees. And so when we really dug in 2013, we were hoping, fingers and toes crossed, that we would find some more good material. And lucky for us, the bone bed kept going, and the quality of material, including skull material, kept up at quite a rapid rate. So this is what it looked like if you were one of our crew members digging in the pit. You have the big quarry wall sort of looming over our head, right in front of you. And you sort of would sit down for these long, hot days. Often it would be over 35 degrees Celsius, or over 100 in the quarry itself, with the sun reflecting off of the sandstone and mudstone quarry walls. And you would basically just remove mudstone, in this case, from the bone layer, one chip at a time, and then carry the buckets away one bucket at a time, and hope that you would find bones as you would dig through. And lucky for us, we found quite a few bones. These are just some examples of the bones that we found in the quarry. Just this beautiful mahogany color against the dark mudstone. And, the quarry was very productive. We found numerous elements, at a pretty high rate. Here's another shot of digging in the quarry. There's my collaborator, Michael Ryan, there up top. We did hit some bones as we were coming down on the fossil layer. Those are an associated set of vertebrae of another ceratopsian, presumably an individual of Wendyceratops, that isn't associated with the main bone layer, which is right where the other members of the crew are sitting. As we're excavating the fossils, we're mapping them to preserve their associations to each other and in the fossil bed. This is what one of those quarry maps looks like, this sort of bird's eye view of the fossils in the quarry. And as you can see, there's 3 or 4, sometimes more good, large, complete bones per grid square. And so this was great for training students because you could sit them down basically anywhere and they would be sure to find, their first dinosaur bone and get excited about it. One of the other cool things about this particular project is while we were excavating this dinosaur, I was approached by History Channel and asked if I had any ideas for the subject of a dinosaur documentary series. And I proposed the concept for Dino Hunt Canada to follow a number of young research teams like ours all over the country to get a cross section of all these new discoveries. So they approved that idea, and History Channel actually came into the quarry with us in the 2014 field season and filmed for that documentary series. And they were right with us as we were discovering never before seen parts of a brand new species of dinosaur. So it was really cool to bring them into the quarry and to bring that experience to audiences, all over the world. It doesn't happen very often that you can actually, have a crew with you as you dig up a brand new species of dinosaur. It was great to work with them. They helped us fund the preparation and mounting of the skeleton, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And so we collected, all said and told, over 200 bones. The vast majority, over 90% of these bones belonging to a single species of horned dinosaur, our new dinosaur, which would become Wendyceratops. We brought all these bones back to the Royal Ontario Museum, and we had 2 technicians work for a year to prepare all those bones. We were lucky that the sediment was soft and the bones were pretty hard and the separation good between the 2, so they could make good progress. So here's Ian McDonald and Shino Sugimoto, who worked with us in the lab. Shino is still a lab tech at the ROM, and Ian McDonald is a lab technician at the Royal Trail Museum. And they did an excellent job prepping out these bones, often under a microscope, and the bone quality is really exceptional. So what did we find? Well, the 200 bones we collected represented the majority of the skeleton. We had most of the forelimbs, a good chunk of the hips, parts of the hind limbs, but not as much as maybe we would like, vertebrae from all parts of the column, and most importantly, we had a really nice selection of skull bones. So this is how we reconstructed the skull of Wendyceratops. It gives you an idea of just the representation that we had of the skull. Now it's the hooks and horns and their sizes and configurations that allow us to determine what species of horned dinosaur we're dealing with, or if we're dealing with a new species. And you can see here we had a really good part of the skull of our new horned dinosaur. This is an animation done by a biomedical communications student at the University of Toronto that worked with me, Lauren DeVito, showing how we go about reconstructing dinosaurs from bone beds based on parts. And you can see we start with the fossil material that we had. We first mirror a right side to a left side if we don't have the left side. Then we go about using closely related species to fill in the missing pieces. And I'll give you one last look at this awesome animation. Allowed us to put a really good picture together of what this early member of the horned dinosaur family looked like. We also work with artists like our paleo artist at the ROM, Danielle Dufault. Given what we had here, we could actually do a pretty reliable life reconstruction. There's a beautiful life reconstruction of what our horned dinosaur would have looked like by Danielle. And so we had quite a bit to go off of. Most of parts of the skeleton, as well as a good complete skull, which is what we needed to really characterize what we had and put it in an evolutionary tree of horned dinosaurs. So what species did we find? Well, horned dinosaurs, as I said, are characterized by the configuration of horns on their faces and ornamentation on their neck shields or frills. And we had a pretty much complete frill of this horned dinosaur. And actually, frills are more important, or more important than any other part of the body for determining the species we had. Why is that the case? Why do you see so much variety? Well, even though early ideas based on Triceratops, which are relatively actually unadorned and bland horned dinosaur, were thought to focus on sort of defense from tyrannosaur predators, the more horned dinosaurs scientists found over the last 100 years, the bewildering variety of these sort of ornaments appeared. And it became clear that rather than for attack and defense, these hooks and horns and spikes and frills were probably more for intraspecific socio-sexual communication, much like the horns of bovids or antelope and their relatives are today. So these are used for species identification and for sexual display, sort of to display that an individual is of mating age and their mating quality involved in sexual selection. And so the reason why these are species specific is that the animals who have these ornaments use them to identify their own species on the landscape. And so they're good markers for scientists to determine what species they belong to today. So we could look at the frill of Wendyceratops, or what would become Wendyceratops, compare it with others, and it's easy to see that the frill is vastly different than any other known horned dinosaur that we had at the time. And so this was pretty easy to justify it as a new species characterized by these like giant sort of drooping hooks that adorned the entire margin of the back part of the frill. And so in 2015, we described this new dinosaur and gave it the name Wendyceratops pinhornensis in a paper by myself and Michael Ryan. And that name, Wendyceratops, recognizes the contributions of Wendy Sloboda to not only discovering the remains of this particular species, but the incredible impact that she's had on vertebrate paleontology in Alberta for several decades, and in recognition of all of these amazing finds that she's made, this just being one of them. Wendy, she marches to the beat of her own drum. She's a really unique personality. She's completely covered in tattoos, wears her hair in dreadlocks. And after this paper was published, the first time I saw her, she jumps out of her field truck, gives me a big hug, and she puts her arm out in front of me, and she shows me the tattoo of her dinosaur there on her, right arm. And she goes, I've been saving this spot for my dinosaur when somebody named a dinosaur after me. And so this is the first dinosaur that was named after Wendy. And so Michael and I were very happy that we could honor her and her contributions. And of course, we're very happy that she found from this particular dinosaur that told us quite a bit about the evolution of this iconic horned group of dinosaurs. So from that point on in this paper, not only did we recognize a new species, but we conducted the largest evolutionary analysis of horned dinosaurs to date. I'm not going to go into the details, but we found that Wendyceratops was an early and primitive member of the short-frilled or centrosaurine horned dinosaurs. One of the most interesting parts of the animal is this nasal horn. It's incomplete. It's not perfectly preserved, but you can tell from what's preserved is that this animal had a tall, erect nose horn, which characterizes a number of later horned dinosaurs, like Centrosaurus or Styracosaurus, and even Chasmosaurine species. But this was by far the oldest recorded occurrence of a tall pointed nose horn in this family. So, it was an important record that showed the antiquity of these horned faces in that group that bears their name, the Ceratopsidae, which means horned faces. And when we look at it in the context of horned dinosaur evolution, it told us even more about how horned dinosaurs evolved their characteristic horned faces. And this, the phylogenetic or evolutionary position of Wendyceratops being actually a bit higher in the tree than some of these earlier centrosaurs, the Aviceratops-like centrosaurs that lack nose horns, given how these characters optimize between the different major groups, the chasmosaurs and centrosaurs, the discovery of Wendyceratops allowed us to definitively state that the nose horn in horned dinosaurs actually evolved twice, once in chasmosaurines and another time in centrosaurines. So this characteristic nose horn, which up until that point had been thought of to be a shared trait that evolved at the base or in the common ancestor of all ceratopsids, Wendyceratops showed us that story was quite a bit more complex, and that horned dinosaurs evolved their nose horns probably at least twice in their evolutionary history. So it told us something significant, not only about horned dinosaur diversity and what ornamentations on the skull look like at an early stage in the evolution of horned dinosaurs, but it told us how horned dinosaurs evolved these horned faces in a different way than we'd expected. So it turned out to be a pretty significant discovery. And as I mentioned before, we got to unravel some of this discovery by a partnership with the History Channel as part of a 4-part television series celebrating Canada's dinosaur heritage and new research really going on across the country, from northern Alberta to and BC to eastern Canada and Nova Scotia. We had one episode that was more or less dedicated to the discovery of Wendyceratops. And because I was involved in the conceptualization of the series, we talked about how we could best promote it. And we did it in a number of novel ways to bring some of these new discoveries that were going on across the country to life. One of them is that in promoting the series, we developed a web page and we had a live feed of the preparation of Wendyceratops. Of course, it wasn't named at the time. It was a new species of horned dinosaur. So people from all over the world could tune in and watch bones of this new dinosaur, unknown bones of this unknown species come to light for the first time. So this was exciting and novel. We had a very highly interactive website where paleontologists from across the country could respond to people's questions that were put on the website. And that was, very exciting. But we also built an exhibit of Wendyceratops to coincide with the premiere of the series in 2015. This was just one of the highlights of my career. It was a lot of fun. We were basically on a race to prepare these 200 bones and get them cast, molded, mounted for the exhibit that would premiere, basically open the day that the series premiered. And so not only did we have sort of virtual presence, but we hoped that the TV series would drive people to come in and see the actual real fossils for themselves and visit the museum. So I've got a video here that shows that process. So this is the crew from Research Casting International, a basically paleontology exhibit dinosaur mounting company founded by a former technician at the ROM right here in Southern Ontario. So we work with them. They do exhibits for all the major museums all over the world. And they were involved heavily in doing the new ROM galleries that opened about 10 years ago. But they've also worked for the Smithsonian and the Natural History Museum in London, Berlin, so on. Since they were basically right next door in Trenton, I was able to go and check on the progress of the mounting of the skeleton, and you can actually see me every now and again pop into here and make adjustments to the mounted skeleton. So I know we've got it right, or at least as right as we can have it. This is the body of Wendyceratops here, being mounted by the technicians. The bones were casted and molded. We didn't put the originals in the skeleton. Actually, a number of the bones of Wendyceratops are actually 3D scanned and printed to go into the mount. Here's a reconstruction of the skull. We had to use, just for time purposes, one of the ROM Centrosaurus specimens as the basis for the skull reconstruction. And, you know, lucky for us, we got everything done just in the nick of time. This is the specimen being installed in the ROM galleries. Literally, I think it was about 48 hours before the premiere of the series in January 2015. It was such a wild ride. We didn't even actually have the scientific name published at this point. That would take a few more months. But this exhibit really tells the story of how scientists go about identifying areas to collect dinosaurs in the field, how they collect those dinosaurs, and then how they go about identifying and naming new species like Wendyceratops. We still have this exhibit up at the ROM. When COVID allows us to open our doors again, if you want to learn more about Wendyceratops, you know, come and visit us at the ROM and have a look at this exhibit. We have the original holotite bones of Wendyceratops on display in the case on the side there for you to look at, as well as this reconstruction. So our crews have not only made, you know, discoveries of of this particular dinosaur, but the Southern Alberta Dinosaur Project has revealed over 10 new species of dinosaurs from Southern Alberta over the time that we've been working, as well as 2 new species of fossil turtle, actually 3 new species of fossil turtle, which is exciting. Here's another one of the exciting discoveries that was made as part of our project. This is one of my former PhD students, Dr. Caleb Brown. He's now the Curator of Dinosaurs at the Royal Tyrrell Museum. And in 2008, collecting in the Milk River Formation, Caleb found, you know, what for all intensive purposes, you know, looks like a fossilized potato. But this fossil here is actually the top of the skull of the world's oldest dome-headed dinosaur, a dinosaur that myself, Caleb, Michael, and a number of other colleagues named in 2013 Akrotholis, meaning high-domed, basically meaning high dome, and Audeti after the rancher where we discovered the specimen. This is a reconstruction of the specimen. Again, a very significant specimen that told us a lot about the early evolution of, again, this other iconic group of dome-headed dinosaurs. And we've been lucky enough to find a whole suite of new species as part of our project. Quite a number of new horned dinosaurs, because their bones, particularly of the horns and frills, are so characteristic and robust, and we find them easily. But we're not the only ones who've been making new discoveries here in Canada over the past couple of decades. In fact, a number of discoveries are made by the general public in Alberta and elsewhere, out walking the badlands and looking for fossils. This particular specimen of Regaliceratops, which would come to be known as Regaliceratops, a really incredible skull, was found in 2005 by Peter Hughes, a retired geologist, walking along the Old Man River in southern Alberta, found the horns poking out of the riverbank, called the Terrell Museum in. They collected this, truly remarkable complete skull of another really unusual horned dinosaur. And this was named by Caleb Brown, Regaliceratops, so regal horn face, basically, and nicknamed Hellboy because of those stumpy orbital horns, which got quite a bit of attention. A really, really flamboyant horned dinosaur with some massive ornamentation off the back of the frill. If you handed me one of these things and didn't tell me it was from a horned dinosaur and told me it was the plate of a stegosaur, I would have believed you. These are incredible ornaments off the back of the skull, and very cool animal. You don't even have to be an earth sciences professional to find a new dinosaur, and a new dinosaur that leads to big things. Another new species, which was named just a few years ago, is Pachyrhinosaurus lacustei. And this particular locality and the first fossil of this dinosaur were found by a school teacher in 1974. Walking along Pipestone Creek up in northern Alberta, he found the fossils, reported them to the Royal Terrell Museum. Darren Tankey and Phil Curry came up, and what he had found is one of the richest single dinosaur bone beds anywhere in the world. There are dozens of bones per square meter in the Pachyrhinosaurus lacustei bone bed. And this touched off a lot of paleontological interest in this area, so much so that it led to the development of a museum which would bear Phil Curry's name. The Philip J. Curry Museum opened up only a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, in the town of Wembley, Alberta, near Grand Prairie, to celebrate the region's fossil heritage. It traces back to the discovery of Pachyrhinosaurus lacustei, and the bone bed is actually only a couple kilometers away. And if you visit the museum, you can actually go on tours of that site. It's a really unbelievably beautiful building, phenomenal galleries, and it stands as sort of a testament to this new age of discovery of dinosaurs in Canada. And there's more work being done in this area because of this museum. And so this is, positive feedback loops. This is a gateway to more fossil discoveries in northern Alberta. Corwin Sullivan of the University of Alberta is now leading the charge, so to speak, of exploration in this area, as well as a number of my former students and postdocs, Nick Campione, Matt Vavrick, Derek Larson. And as a result of this research, new dinosaurs are being found. In 2015, parts of the skull and claws of a raptor dinosaur. So it's not just horned dinosaurs, not just plant eaters that are being found. The meat eaters are being found too. This is the wicked killer claw on the foot of a raptor dinosaur that Phil Bell and team named Northern Claw, or Boreonychus, from the same bone bed that Pachyrhinosaurus lacustei is from. To honor Phil's contributions to paleontology in Alberta and Canada and globally, and his continued contributions, myself and my team named a troodontid dinosaur, Alberta venator currii, after him a few years ago. This is from the Horseshoe Canyon Formation, right around the Royal Terrell Museum itself. These dinosaurs are particularly rare because they have delicate, bird-like hollow bones. And so there takes a while to find good material enough to name. And we're also finding the big meat eaters too here in Canada. This is Thanatothoristes degratorum. This is a COVID dinosaur. The paper came out in the last year. A team led by a graduate student at the University of Calgary Jared Voix et al., including Darla Zelenitsky of the University of Calgary. This is an animal that is found in southern Alberta near our field area from the Foremost Formation, and is the oldest named tyrannosaurid from Alberta and one of the oldest ones from North America. So the discoveries are coming fast and furious. And I would say, the most exciting part of this curve isn't the discoveries that have been made here, but it's the trend. There is no sign of these discoveries slowing down. We're having new dinosaurs that continue to be named, like Thanatothuristes. And there's a number of new species that are still on the horizon. I'll give you a quick sneak peek into that. Our project is continuing. These are photos from our last basically few field seasons. There's Wendy with a mummified duckbill dinosaur skeleton. There's the upper jaw of a huge Daspletosaurus from the Old Man Formation that we're working on. The lower right-hand corner is an almost complete skeleton, unfortunately minus the head of a Lambeosaurine or crested duckbill dinosaur that we've uncovered. But we've also uncovered another bone bed of horned dinosaurs, this time from the middle of the Old Man Formation. We've got parts of the every bone of the skull in multiples. And this is another really wildly ornamented new species of horned dinosaur that Michael Ryan and I are working on as we speak. Here's the first look at reconstruction of it. We're still working on this reconstruction. The animal doesn't have a name yet, but look out for it in the news over the next year or so. This is a very cool new member of that horned dinosaur family that's on its way, and there's a lot more to come. So I'll close just by saying, unfortunately, I can't invite you to come and visit the ROM at this moment since we're closed due to the provincial lockdowns. But when those lift, the ROM has one of the best collections of dinosaurs and the largest galleries of dinosaur skeletons anywhere in the world. We have over 25 skeletons on display, including that special exhibit of Wendyceratops. So if you want to see more of this history and see more of the new discoveries that are being made, come by the ROM if you're in the area. And we're getting more fossil galleries opening later this year, scheduled to open in November, is our gallery of the age before the dinosaurs, featuring the Burgess Shale. This is our Dawn of Life gallery project. It's the last gallery of the Renaissance ROM gallery development, and it's very exciting. The plans look amazing, and we're just basically about to start installing the specimens very shortly. So there's lots on the horizon at the ROM in terms of fossils to come and see. Lots of people to thank. Special thanks to Mike O'Ryan, Phil Curry, Dave Eberth, Don Brinkman, and all of our field crews, students, and volunteers for helping make the Southern Alberta Dinosaur Project, a huge success. So thank you. I'm happy to take your questions if you have any.
David, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and also sharing about the discovery of the Wendyceratops. It was very cool.
You're welcome. I went a bit over time, but hopefully people bared with me, and happy to answer questions for as long as people have them.
Yeah, so we do have a few questions, so I'm going to maybe try to combine some of them, but we'll start with this one. How easy is it for you as an expert to identify a dinosaur species just from some bone fragments? Are they easily distinguishable to an expert?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes. Once you figure out what you're looking for, it's pretty easy to identify a dinosaur bone or bone fragment out in the Badlands. And the reason is that the dinosaur bones, that we find in Alberta and actually most places are basically preserved at the molecular level. So they have all the characteristics of a bone that you would see today. So they have a striated cortex, an outer layer of more dense bone that you can usually see the bone fibers in. And then when you open up the bone, you can see like an arrow bar-like texture, the marrow cavity. These are characteristics of bone today, and you're easily recognizable in the dinosaur bones of Alberta. And so all you need to do is sort of get your eye to it. And it's very easy to identify even a very, very small fragment as a dinosaur bone. Now, it takes a little bit more of the bone to be able to identify what group of dinosaurs you have. But if you have a single bone, or even say, I would even say if you have half of any bone, you can pretty much identify whether it was an armored dinosaur, a horned dinosaur, a duck-billed dinosaur, or a tyrannosaur. And then to the species level, you have to have the right parts. So for a horned dinosaur, you could have a complete skeleton without the skull, and you would have no idea what species it was, or even genus. So you need the frill in order to tell what species it is. And so sort of the finer you want to go in your identification, the more specific part that you need to be able to identify it precisely.
Very cool. The next question is, why plaster the fossils before they are completely out of the ground? Is it for stability?
Yeah, that is exactly right. So even though the fossil bones of Alberta and everywhere have typically been permineralized, that means sort of they've been infilled with minerals, typically at the molecular level. They're sort of bones that have turned to stone. I mean, your bone is essentially a rock as it is, that your body precipitates. And those just become modified through the fossilization process. That said, the fossil bones tend to be very brittle. And so, and the ones that are near the surface tend to be affected by like freeze thaw cycles and plant roots and so on. So they tend to be very cracked. And so if you're going to pick up a big bone in the field, it would crumble to a bunch of pieces or hundreds of pieces. So it would be a very difficult task to take those individual pieces in a bag and try to put them back together. By making a cast for the bone using plaster and burlap, and it's literally a cast, it's the exact same material that you would make a plaster cast for a broken bone. We do that for the same purpose. You would make a cast for a broken bone on your arm. It takes the broken pieces and it holds them in the right place and stabilizes them so that you could transport your broken bone, or that we could transport that fossil out of the ground and back to the lab where we can then prepare it under controlled conditions, inject it with more glues and stabilizers, and then get basically the bone out in one piece. So the reason is basically the same reason that we make a cast for a broken bone. It's to stabilize it, to keep the pieces together and in the right order so that we can transport the bone safely without causing any further damage back to the lab.
Very cool. Is the mahogany color of the bones natural, or was it stained by its surroundings?
That's a good question. The color of fossil bones wildly varies. I've seen bones that are jet black. There's a big Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton, very famous one at the Royal Tyrrell Museum called Black Beauty, and that was named because the bones of the skeleton were jet black. The bones of Dinosaur Provincial Park, for instance, are typically a chocolate milk color. And the bones of the Old Man Formation typically have an orange hue to them. And this is just, it's a quirk of fossilization. The color is actually not natural to the bones. The bones of the dinosaurs in life would have been the color of bones today. So it would have been white. The color that we see in the fossils is caused by the particular minerals that were percolating through the groundwater and that were involved in the fossilization, the permineralization of that particular bone. And so different areas and at different times have different minerals that were involved in the fossilization process, and those minerals are responsible for the different colors.
Very cool. So we have a lot of aspiring paleontologists watching this live stream. So I'm going to combine a couple questions, but
great.
Some people would like to know if you have any advice for junior paleontologists on how to become an adult paleontologist. Another parent added on, she wanted to know the pros and cons of becoming a paleontologist. So
Ooh, I don't know if I want to talk about the cons. No, I'm kidding. So I'll start with how do you get to be a paleontologist? And I'll start by saying to all the would-be young paleontologists out there, I was one of you. I caught the dinosaur bug when I was about 3 years old, and my grandma brought me a book. Actually, it was from the Natural History Museum in London from one of her visits there. But my career path was really set when I visited the Royal Ontario Museum. I was 4. I saw, it was my first ever visit to a museum. I saw real dinosaur skeletons on display there for the first time. And it just absolutely blew me away. And from that point on, I had been telling everyone who would listen that I wanted to be a paleontologist when I grew up. For me, and what I tell a lot of the young paleontologists, even though you sort of solidify that career path when you are in high school, taking more science classes, taking typically biology or geology classes, or both when you're in undergrad and then on to grad school. When you're young, you don't get to do all that stuff. So what do you do if you're 5 years old or 7 years old or 10 years old and you want to be a paleontologist? Well, my recommendation to all the young paleontologists out there is to read about paleontology. And when I was a kid, I literally read every book about dinosaurs in my local branch of the library. I then got my parents to loan all the books they could from other branches to my branch. I went whenever I was visiting my grandma or wherever I was, I would go to the library. And it was hard actually for me to get dinosaur books. And I remember when I was a kid, I'd save up all my money and I would have one trip usually into the ROM every year. And I get to go to the world's biggest bookstore and they had books on the shelf that you could just never get. And so I would spend all my money and buy dinosaur books that they didn't have at the libraries. Kids these days, are really lucky. Now we have, tremendous access to information on dinos. You can download books, you can go on to websites, and you can go on YouTube and you can watch dinosaur documentaries like Dino Hunt Canada. And there's books that are written by paleontologists, kids books written by paleontologists like famous as Phil Curry and Tom Holtz for all age levels. And so, as you grow and get closer to being able to take paleontology in school, and set your career path, there's books for you all along the way. And I'd encourage you to look at books written by paleontologists and read those first and just, read as much as you can. It really helped me.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful advice, because we did have someone asking about what other resources you would recommend. So that was great that you touched on that. We have a couple questions from people wondering, what's life like in field camp? Do you have bathrooms, and what's the best and worst part of being out in the field?
So for me, the field is, it is my favorite part of paleontology. There is just nothing like being out in the field, walking the badlands and finding a dinosaur bone, because when you find that dinosaur bone, no one has ever seen it before. And layer on that, when you start to be able to identify the type of dinosaur from the bone that you find, and then when you get familiar enough where, if you find, like Caleb did or like Wendy did, when you start to get enough knowledge where you can pick up a bone and know that it's from a species new to science. I'll never forget when Caleb brought that Akrotholis dome back into camp. I don't think he'll ever forget it either. I was just like doing backflips because I knew that it was a new species instantly. And so, that thrill of discovery and being able to like contribute, at that level to our baseline knowledge of the past and how ecosystem change through time is just absolutely, it's a thrill. And I've been lucky enough. I think I've been on digs on 4 or 5 continents, and it's just exhilarating. So as far as life in field camp goes, it really depends on where you are, and life in the field can actually be accessible to everyone. If and it's getting more accessible all the time. So, there are places like the middle of the Sahara Desert, where I've been in northern Sudan, where it's literally 120 degrees Fahrenheit. You can watch the sweat bead off you. Your day's drive through sand dunes, from anybody. There's no bathrooms. You have to bring everything in. The same in the Arctic. I've helicoptered out to Arctic islands, and it's extremely isolating, and it's tough. It's tough. But it's also, being on the frontier of discovery in those places, and the Arctic, and some of these places like the Sahara. There's still so many discoveries to be made. It's incredible to stand and look over a set of badlands where no person has ever, no, at least no scientist has ever looked for dinosaur bones there specifically is cool. But I do want to say, like, there are areas like Dinosaur Provincial Park where you can literally drive right up to the outcrop and still find dinosaurs. So even, people with disabilities can find dinosaurs, and finding dinosaurs out in the field is for everybody. And as I said, we gave examples of school teachers, and I should have thrown up Borealopelta there, the amazing statue of a dinosaur found in the tar sands. It was found by a bucket loader operator who was, taking out big scoops of tar impregnated sand to refine into oil, hit a dinosaur skeleton that had floated out to sea. Anybody can find them. And so, the field is exciting and everybody can experience it. Depending on where you are, it can be rough, or it can be, you could just be driving from your house or driving from a hotel.
Very cool. To follow up, someone wondered, how would someone volunteer to go and help dig for a field season?
The way that I got started was actually through a program that the Trail Museum used to run called Field Experience. And I worked in a program for many years called Day Digs out of the Trail Museum, where you as a general member of the public could actually basically pay for the experience, and not a lot of money, mind you, to go and dig either for a day or to dig for a week. And I was waiting literally for years to take part in this program. And when I turned 18 and became eligible to go on this field experience program, I did it immediately, and it obviously changed my life. I met Michael Ryan. He took me to the Milk River Ridge horned dinosaur quarry there, where we're digging up another new type of dinosaur that Michael named. And he took me under his wing. That's a great place to start. They're still running day dinosaur digs in Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta, run by or at least have been run by a longtime volunteer of ours, David Lloyd. I don't, this summer is probably difficult for those types of programs, but there are a lot of other programs like that, including in Dinosaur Provincial Park here in Canada, where you can actually get a taste of it. Volunteering is something you can volunteer to do, and you might get lucky and get a spot, but it is sort of touch and go when it comes to volunteering, because getting out to the Badlands is expensive, and and so on. You're probably best approaching museum public programs to get started. But once you get into university, in particular, seek out the paleontologists there, and ask what the opportunities are that are available, near you, and they can help you.
Very cool. Just being conscious of time, I'm going to just do our last question tonight. What would you say were the primary catalysts for the new dino rush in Canada?
The primary catalysts, this is pretty straightforward, I think. So there, obviously the building of the Trail Museum was really significant. But even then, for quite some time, Phil Currie was more or less the only paid dinosaur paleontologist in Canada. Hans Dieter Seuss worked out of the ROM for a bit and definitely worked on dinosaurs, but he sort of worked on all sorts of different things. The other paleontologists that were around for the next couple of decades worked on ancient amphibians or ancient mammals, things like this. But the real boom came with a big set of hirings in the sort of early 2000s and the early 2000s, and I was part of that hire. When I started as a graduate student, there was two or three other maybe graduate students around at the time who were working on dinosaurs. By the time And there was only a few programs that offered a graduate program in dinosaur paleontology. Sort of by the time that I had finished, there was many more. And then now there's probably 10 or 12 labs of people who are dedicated to studying dinosaurs in universities across the country in different museums. And the way that I'm sort of taking a circuitous route here, but why was there this big group set of hiring of dinosaur specialists across the country? It's probably related in part to this renewed popularity of paleontology after a little movie called Jurassic Park. So that came out in 1993, and obviously was the biggest movie up until that point. There were the two sequels that took you to sort of the end of, to the turn of that century, to around the millennium. And dinosaur popularity since that time has just gone like basically atmospheric. Because of the popularity of dinosaurs publicly, there was more hiring, there was more interest in paleontology, there was more students who were getting into studying dinosaurs, and there was more hirings in the area. And that's what I would ascribe to it, really. And that's something we see all over the world. So, what I've showed you in Canada is a microcosm here in Canada, but that same trend is present all over the world. There's more dinosaur research being published, more dinosaurs being discovered now than any point in history. There's more paleontologists working on dinosaurs, more students working on dinosaurs than ever before. And that's why you're seeing this big uptick in the rate of discoveries. Now is we're literally discovering a new dinosaur species, or paleontologists worldwide, about every 2 to 3 weeks. And yeah, it's incredible. And that's just a proxy for all the other research that's going on in the area. So it really is an incredible time to be a paleontologist working on dinosaurs. And it truly is this sort of second golden age of dinosaur discovery. It's happening right now. And there's no sign of it abating anytime soon. Those discoveries are going to keep going. We only know about 1,000 species of dinosaurs for the last 150 million years. Put that up against 6,000 species of mammals and 12,000 species of birds and about 8,000-ish species of reptiles on the planet at this instant today. We have so much to learn. So all those young paleontologists in the audience, you don't have to worry. It's a growth career. There will still be tons of dinosaurs for you to discover, when you get your job and you start studying paleontology. And there'll be lots of research left to do.
I think that's like a wonderful message to end on for those that are watching tonight. So thank you once again, David, and thank you to those that joined us virtually. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, Dinosaurs, the Age of Big, Weird, Feathered Things, as well as Sonica, the Sound Experience, will be available to the public once we are safely able to open once again here in Ontario. To stay up to date in all things at the museum, such as reopening announcements, exhibition news, and upcoming programming dates, please consider signing up for our newsletter or follow us on social media. Please see themuseum.ca for more details and to sign up. Thank you, stay safe, and have a great night.